Hi, thanks. Thank you so much. DevOps Days online so far. I had a great time. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for joining. I'm a bit intimidated after the last talk. I thought it was really, really good. There's also quite some overlap, so I hope that like my talk can be a great addition to the talk we just saw. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. So again, my name is Lian Li. There is a company that has a similar or the exact same name actually. So if you want to find me on the internet, you should not try and Google Lian Li because you're going to scroll through a lot of pictures of computers. So instead, you can find me on the internet at Chimney42. So on Twitter, for example. Yeah, I'm a cloud native engineer and a consultant. Container Solutions is a company that focuses on programmable infrastructure, on cloud transformation. So Kubernetes is definitely something that I get into touch a lot with. But I'm also one of the organizers at Serverless Days, which is often a little bit ironic that, working for Container Solutions, I also have a part of the Serverless Days community. So this was 2019 and 2020. This year, obviously, everything changed a little bit, but it was still a great event. So if you want to learn more about Serverless Days, feel free to talk to me about that after the talk as well. So yeah, my talk is called Kubernetes Won't Save You. And before you say anything, neither will serverless. So this is not a serverless pitch talk. So what I want to talk about is not technology. Obviously, I'm in the business track. I want to talk about culture. So it's not just the culture that we might think of when we say culture, but it's the culture of problem solving, of adapting to change, of building trust and resilience in your organization. So everything I will talk about today is just based on the experience that I have working in the tech industry. I started about a decade ago as an intern, then I became a software engineer mainly, I worked as a web developer mainly, and then moved to DevOps, and now I'm a consultant. So first, let's talk about the state of Kubernetes right now. Originally, I wanted to do like a vote here because I wanted to prove a point, but that's not really possible now. So I'm just going to assume that most of you have already heard about Kubernetes. If not, very briefly, it's just a piece of technology that promises to make infrastructure tasks cheaper and faster and more flexible. So most of you probably have heard it. Some of you probably have implemented it, running it in production, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of you also have had their fair share of frustrations with Kubernetes. So this image is taken from a white paper written by our CTO, Ian Crosby. And this is based on a book by Geoffrey A. Moore, which is called Crossing the Chasm. So in this book, Moore is taking a look at the technology adoption lifecycle. And his hypothesis is that before any kind of technology is adopted to the mainstream market, it needs to do something. It needs to cross the chasm of early market to mainstream market. So this image, when Ian published it in his talk, this was about 2 years ago. And I would argue that, in fact, we have now crossed that chasm with Kubernetes, and it has become mainstream. And that brings up all the good and bad things about it. So to illustrate my point, these are a couple of headlines taken from the last 3 years that have caused some, I would say, outrage or interest in the DevOps community. So this one's definitely one of my favorites. Pivotal was helping forward with their cloud transformation, or with their digital transformation. They didn't, as far as I remember, they didn't even look at Kubernetes as a possibility to solve their infrastructure problems. And Ford sued them, arguing that Kubernetes, being the de facto industry standard, should have been considered. And by not doing that, they were negligent in their work as consultants. So, and they won that lawsuit. So I encourage you to Google all these stories later, especially this one. Kubernetes has become boring, and that's good. The point of these headlines is to point out that Kubernetes has become, or is still becoming, the de facto industry standard, which generally I think is good. But they also point to the fact that people are slowly understanding that Kubernetes is not a silver bullet and will not just come and magically solve all your problems, but it's just a regular technology like all the others, and you have to actually put some elbow grease into it and really use it and work with it, and instead of trying to let it solve all your problems. So when your cloud native transformation goes wrong, or when you're having problems building stuff in the cloud, moving to the cloud, most of the time it's because you're just misunderstanding the problem. You're just holding it wrong. To me, I found that there are two aspects to this misunderstanding of the problem. One is the attitude towards technology, and the other is the attitude towards people. So the attitude towards technology would be attitude towards tools that we use and the product that we built. And the attitude towards people would be the attitude towards how we work, the concept of work. What is the actual work we're doing? And I want to talk a bit about both here. I'm going to start with technology because I think that people part is a bit more interesting, and I want you to stay until the end of the talk. So I'm going to end with the more interesting one. So let's start with the big question. What is cloud native? I don't know if you have a good definition of cloud native. I think it's quite fuzzy as a word. This is how the CNCF defines it in its charter. So the CNCF says that cloud native technologies empower organizations to build and run scalable applications in modern dynamic environments such as public, private, and hybrid clouds. Container service meshes, microservices, immutable infrastructure, and declarative APIs exemplify this approach. So this is a very technical definition. It's about computing. So it describes the general idea of cloud native technologies, what they do, in which environment they do it. And then they list a couple of examples that would exemplify this approach. So they do say that cloud native is not just technologies, there is an approach behind it. But this definition doesn't really say a lot about the approach, how it would look like, how you would understand other aspects besides technology, for example, project management, strategy, culture. So let's take a look at this matrix, which we call the cloud native maturity matrix. So the cloud native maturity matrix is a tool that at Container Solutions, we use it to assess what the current state of a customer is and show them where we could take them and how many transformational steps we think it would take. So how far away they are from that step that they want to have. So what's important in this graphic is that cloud native is not just a collection of tools here, but it's more like a philosophy or mindset, an approach around the individual aspects. So, you have a layer for culture, for technical architecture, for infrastructure, and all of them are supposed to somehow align. So when we meet with a client for the first or second time, we would do an assessment with them on that kind of scale to gauge where the organization currently lies. And then we would get a result that kind of looks like this, for example. And you could then see the blue line is where the customer is right now. And then we would say this red line, that's where you want to go. This is the cloud native approach or the cloud native environment. So as an example, most experts in the cloud native space would probably recommend something like a microservice architecture. But if you have that and you still have a waterfall culture, then this will not yield the best results for you because you're still carrying the legacy process of that waterfall culture with you. And when you only couple the microservices architecture with an agile and lean mindset, will you be able to leverage the advantages of being fast and flexible in your software engineering process. So if you want to take a look at this more closely on your own time, there's a website. So basically, there's an interactive tool for that. So it will ask you a couple of questions, and then it will assess where kind of on the axis you are right now. This is an XKCD entitled Automation. So we're still talking about our attitudes toward technology, right? This XKCD kind of explains this idea of the sunken cost fallacy. So you would start out working on some kind of manual task that is probably annoying because you have to do it all the time, and you think about automating it. So in your mind, you think that you write the code for it. It will take a little bit more work in the beginning, but at some point, because automation takes over, you pass that point where you spend less time working on the original task, or you don't spend any time working on the original task anymore, because automation has taken that over for you, and you can spend all of your free time. But in reality, what happens is that you spend all this time writing code, and then you have to debug it, and then you have to rethink it and redesign it, and then you just develop this thing forever, while at the same time, you don't have any time for the original task anymore. So now you're spending all your time doing operating this tool that doesn't even help you do the original task. So a lot of engineers, I think, have been victim to this because we like to play around with technology. We like to not repeat ourselves. And sometimes we're not that good at measuring what we think to be true. So I want to give an example here, like a thing that happened when I started consulting. We had a customer that developed a piece of technology. It was a really interesting project from the outside. It had AI in it, it had IoT in it, and then they also wanted Kubernetes in it too. So we thought, right, like obviously you want Kubernetes with this because you want to build like new technology. It should be highly scalable, highly available, all the good stuff. So we built this platform for them. Everything was built in microservices and ran on GKE. We used Kotlin. In the middle of the project, we migrated to TypeScript, and it was just a really fun, fast-moving project. And then one day, the customer pushed us to deliver for a demo with investors and the press. So the use case suddenly changed, and they didn't want to all this high availability stuff anymore. What they wanted was to run it on a physical server, on a single one, and the server couldn't be connected to the internet ever. So they bought a physical server, they shipped it to us by mail, we installed our application on it via USB drives, and then we shipped the server back to them. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. In retrospect, I feel there's two ways to look at this. So we either were working with an entirely different project in mind, or we did the most physical handover of a cloud application that I've ever seen. By the way, if you read XKCDs, you know that there's always this hover text, the title text of it. And the title text for this XKCD reads, automating comes from the roots auto, meaning self, and mating, meaning screwing. So I think that's pretty accurate in this context. So how would you then try not fall victim to this fallacy? Something that helps me, I think, is this design principle, form follows function, which means the shape of a building or object should primarily relate to its intended function or purpose. So if you want to put it in a different way, it means first think about what something should do, and then think about how it should look like. Makes sense, right? But when we transfer this to a business context, we sometimes see that not all companies follow this principle. Some companies, they will use tech like AI or blockchain or Kubernetes simply because everyone's doing it. We crossed the chasm. It's mainstream now, but it doesn't have any added value to their actual product or business. Sometimes even because they don't know what their business is. And so the thing is that if you look at technology, what technology is at the core of it, tech is a byproduct of problem solving. So you're trying to solve a problem, and tech is just the means to solve the problem. So you need to ask yourself, is the tech that you're building, the department that you're running, is this still solving the core problem and contributing to your core business? Or has it maybe begun to have a life of itself? So one way that you could try and do that is by utilizing this model developed by Simon Sinek. It's called the Golden Circle. And this was used by Simon to illustrate why people flock to companies like Apple, because they have a message, they have a purpose, they have something that's very relatable to people that people will trust them with. They think that this is a purpose that I can get behind, so I will trust this company. So how can you utilize this golden circle to find out what your business purpose is? We can do that by looking at these levels individually. And if you already have a running business, you should probably start with the outer layer, which is the consistency of what. So this would mean that you ask yourself, what are the products that you're selling? What are the services that you're offering? What is your role at work? It's the specific things that you do. Once you've listed those things, you can ask yourself about the how you're doing these things. So your strengths, your values, your guiding principles, the way that you are doing the things that you listed in what. This is your how. So maybe if you have an online shop, then the how is maybe that you want to have the best customer service. You want to be like super nice and very approachable. That would be your how. And then lastly, you can ask yourself, why? Why do you do this? What is your purpose? What is your cause? What do you believe in? So if you have this online shop and you want to be super helpful, then maybe the why is because you want people to have the best online shopping experience when they go out and buy shoes, for example. So you should work hard on understanding your purpose and the message that you can convey to your customers through about your purpose. Because in the end, a solution is only as good as the framing of the problem, as your framing of the problem. This is a quote by Tatiana Mac, who's an American engineer, and she's very well known in the accessibility space. She focuses on ethical and inclusive and accessible products. So you should definitely check her out on Twitter. And this point that she's making is really important in the sense that there's an upper limit to how good your solution can be. And this upper limit is the framing of the problem. So the better you understand the problem, the better your solution can be. Makes sense, I think. So I spoke about the attitude towards tech, and now I want to speak about the attitude towards people, or the attitude towards our work that we're doing, or how we do the work that we're doing. For me, there are three aspects to this. The continuous learning, which is something that, you shouldn't forget that there has not been a lot of time that Kubernetes was released. It was 6 years ago. Recently on Twitter, I don't have the picture here because I just saw it yesterday. Someone found a job post on LinkedIn, I think, for an engineer who should have 12 plus years of Kubernetes experience of Kubernetes, which it being released 6 years ago is actually kind of hard. So we're all new to this. We're all still learning. And most, if not all, modern paradigms in the tech industry, they show the same trend now, which is that we're moving away from these very long-running stagnant processes that are basically like trains. You start and then you cannot change direction, or it's really, really hard, and you can only change into ways that are already planned, like there are already tracks there. So someone needed to have pre-planned the change before. So we're moving away from that to fast and flexible processes like the agile methodologies. Instead of planning our releases out for months or years in advance, now most companies follow agile principles of failing fast and often. And then you build in this process of failing fast and often into a perpetual feedback loop. So you have the ceremonies that you use to optimize your failing process with this feedback that you get. So this is what we would call Kaizen, continuous learning. Another very important factor here is resilience and psychological safety. So for the cycle of continuous failure to not burn out your employees, you need to create a culture that encourages failing and learning from it. And this continuous failing requires abilities like taking responsibility, self-efficacy, which is the belief that you are capable of reaching your goals and being good at your job. You need to be able to handle stress and all these things. So psychological safety in these kinds of fast failing environments is really, really crucial. And the third aspect here is collaboration. So because everything is now distributed, let's look at your microservices. If you worked on a legacy-based code base before, and then you helped maybe split that out into microservices, you probably have noticed that you simplify each service, but now communication between the services becomes much more crucial, maybe more complex, but they definitely become the linchpin of your application as a whole. So similarly to that, your teams are now more distributed, especially now with COVID and everything. We're all working remotely. So also in a cloud native transformation, maybe what used to be your infra team is now the AWS implementation team. So that means that you need to put a lot of effort into streamlining communication and collaboration to make that collaboration possible and effective. So in conclusion, this is a quote by Ben Chestnut, great name. He's the co-founder and CEO of MailChimp. And he's saying, fearlessness begets happiness, which begets creativity, which begets innovation, which begets profits. So I don't personally, profits are not the most important thing to me in my daily work. But this is a very good point here. I talked about, like collaboration, psychological safety. They didn't talk about things like innovation, creativity, and speed. So those are things that will come when people feel confident with the tools they are using and the ways that they are working. Then, when you feel confident and comfortable, then you're able to really step out of your comfort zone, be creative. And, a lot of times when we see cloud native transformation failing, that's when we see that employees have not been appropriately prepared for the change of challenges and responsibilities. So all these factors are really important. So I want to give another example where we had a client who wanted us to build a CI/CD platform. And, we built everything with full CI/CD in mind. Everything was like trunk-based, microservices, fully automated, all the way to productions. We built operators to provision the components. It was a really, really interesting, cool project to play around with new technology. Again, like maybe over engineering a bit. But when we looked at how it was used, we were actually quite surprised because people built so many workarounds that then in the end let them use their old processes like Git flow with multi-month release branches. People did not want to take ownership of the components. People just wanted to throw their things over the wall. They didn't want DevOps. They didn't feel comfortable with DevOps. They weren't there yet. They hadn't learned all the paradigms that surround DevOps work or the way to think as a DevOps. And collaboration was mainly expressed through very rigid processes and clear hierarchies. This is how they've always worked, and this is how their culture always functioned. And management only made an attempt to change the underlying culture, I think 2 years since we started on the project. So yeah, I would say that the main thing you should think about is that you shouldn't do a transformation because you want to use Kubernetes. You should use Kubernetes because you're doing a transformation. You want to change things in your organization, and Kubernetes allows you to leverage more of that flexibility while you're doing the transformation, not the other way around. So as I said in my abstract, use Kubernetes, but it won't save you. What will save you is to have the right mindset, and then you can use Kubernetes, and it might be what you need to save yourself. So to end this presentation, I want to just show you something cool we at Container Solutions created to evaluate and plan and think about individual transformations, which is called the Cloud Native Transformation Kit. So our CEO, Jamie Dobson, and our CRO, Pini Resnick, wrote this book with our technical writer, Michelle, on cloud native transformation. It's a collection of patterns to implement cloud native transformations. And the patterns kind of look like this. We built this really nice, cool looking cards. And you can go to our website and check them out and also get a free sample. Actually, you can win a book and or cards. I'm not sure how many we have, but I'm sure you'll be able to find that out. So to take part in this raffle, you have to find out our secret code, which I think you can find on Twitter at ContainerSluty. And you say our secret code here in the chat at devopsdays. We are we were looking out for everyone, everyone's chatting. And that's how you enter the raffle. So thank you very much. Again, thanks for having me. And you can find me on Twitter, as I said. I'm going to put up the slides afterwards. And if you have any questions, you can ask them now or hit me up on Twitter. Thank you.
Wonderful. Lian, thank you so much for that amazing talk. I think that the idea behind culture over tooling is one that a lot of us can recognize, and that tooling alone is not going to solve our problems. But you really articulated that in a wonderful way. I've just been watching the chat. I think a lot of people are asking certain questions, but I think due to the timing, I'll ask you to just drop it into the chat itself. I would encourage everyone to step into the the Container Solutions virtual booth. They're one of our sponsors today. Thank you very much for that. And I'm just reading the chat while
because there was some confusion around if we have a booth. So I don't think we have one, but we have people here at the conference. We're hanging out. Happy to have a chat.
Exactly.
No worries. Or on Twitter or here.